Good morning. Thank you all for joining us for today's coffee talk. My name is Sean O'Brien, President of Quick Rate, and as always, I'm pleased to be joined by Steve Huntington. Steve, you want to go ahead and introduce and say hello?
Yeah, thanks everyone for spending another Friday morning or late Friday morning with us here pre Turkey Day. My name is Steve Huntington. I'm the director of analytics here at Quick Rate, and I spent my entire career working with community financial institutions in a multitude of different ways, and spent more than half of that time working with Sean here at Quick Rate.
Awesome. And we are very pleased to welcome back our dear friend Paul Allen from Saltmarsh. Paul, you want to say good morning and introduce yourself?
Good morning, Sean and Steve. Thank you very much for letting me join you. I'm a director with Saltmarsh. We get to work with financial institutions across the country and do fun stuff like, I don't know, calculate their allowance for loan loss and help them with internal audit and all kinds of fun stuff like that. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Awesome. Appreciate you joining us, Paul. These are always our best sessions when you're on here. So thank you again for joining us. Just a little bit of information about Paul's firm, Saltmarsh. And again, thank you for joining us today. Just a reminder, you can communicate with us throughout the discussion. Use the chat feature, the Q&A box. We'll monitor those and take those at an appropriate break in the conversation, or certainly at the end of the discussion today. Just as always, a couple of questions to get you started. I think this time, Steve, I can run them unless you'd like to do that.
No, I will give the power back to you, Sean.
All right. Brian, I apologize for the echo. I know when I'm not speaking, a lot of times it is mine. I will mute myself, but hopefully that echo will go away. But a couple of questions to get started. All right. Just three. So first one is just, are you experiencing any increases in your past due loans? Just a simple yes or no, and we'll give that 30 to 45 seconds to go here. So 78% of you who responded should be 22%, but 23% are not. So thank you for sharing. And we will move to the next question here. Did you charge off any loans this quarter? Again, just a simple yes or no, and we'll give it 30 to 45 seconds. 98% of you who responded have in fact charged off loans this quarter, and 2% of you have not. So thank you for participating. And on to our final question. Regarding reserves, do you anticipate increasing your reserve before year end? Again, just a simple yes or no. 78% of you are, and 22% of you are not. So again, thank you all very much for joining in those. The responses to these polling questions, along with the link to today's recording and a copy of the slides used, will be sent to you in an email Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning. And again, we'll include everything shared here today. Excuse me. All right. All right. So, good thing I don't have to talk that much here. We're thrilled to have Paul join us. And as always, we're going to turn to him for his kind of thoughts and suggestions as we head in, close out 25 and then look forward to 2026. Paul, you want to take it away?
Absolutely. Thank you. First of all, congratulations on having everyone be able to move from this brand new model called CECL, this new approach, to now it is kind of normal, and we've gotten through the transition, if you will. And so wanted just to talk to everyone a little bit about now that this is the normal process, what should we be thinking about and so forth as we look at closing out 25 and moving into 26. Sean, I put together just a few thoughts on that next slide. Um, Certainly, we're moving from trying to understand what CECL is even about and setting up new processes and new procedures to now it's a pretty normal process for most people. And so what we're kind of listening and hearing from um, industry leaders, thought leaders, and regulators and so forth about what we should be doing going forward. Three things seem to be a repetitive theme, and one of those is just the overall concept of model governance and validation. That once we have now put things in place and we may have refined procedures and maybe added responsibilities to certain people and so forth, there's an expectation that that would be well documented. So I would encourage everyone to kind of revisit how is our documentation of the policy, how well defined have we identified roles and responsibilities, and how well is that documented? All of the regulatory agencies have guidance about model oversight and governance. And in those model regulations or best practices, there are touch points in terms of data governance, that is data integrity and how we're handling the data and how we make sure the right data gets into the model. There is guidance about validating the model. In other words, having someone independent of the process look over the shoulder and determine that the model is working as intended. And then this concept of stress testing and back testing, and you're probably pretty familiar with stress testing and back testing as we've historically done in other models in the institution. I'll use interest rate risk, for example, where we look at stress testing, different rate scenarios, and we look at back testing. What did we expect a year ago? How did that play out? And so there's going to probably be more of a focus and a little bit higher expectation. And I encourage you as management to revisit the policy frequently. The industry best practices are slightly changing. There's a little bit of a refinement. We're hearing from peers how, what are best practices, how are other people dealing with this, and then documenting that. So that's one kind of broad area that we would expect that you'll hear more about and you should be preparing for. The second one is mapping, just that concept of data integrity. Do we know that the data is going into the model correctly so that the model can process and give us results? And so that's the normal, just data integrity controls, making sure that as new accounts or new GL accounts are set up and so forth, are we making sure that that's mapping into the model? Now, for CECLSolver, that is based on the call report information. So we're really talking about, are you making sure that your call report mapping is correct? Because that's what's driving the model. And we are unfortunately seeing a couple of oops sometimes where we reclassify or shift or move a loan category or product around a little bit, and it doesn't get picked up correctly in the call report or in the GL mapping. And so sometimes we get a little bit of oops. There's been a couple of news stories about people that said, oops, we're going to have to reissue our call report, modify our call report. We're going to have to make changes and so forth. So just want to encourage you to remind you that the data integrity is an ongoing process. For most models, the best practice is that you formally check your mapping at least once a year or when there are new products and services. So just encourage you to allocate some of your time and resources to revisit and make sure your mapping is going correctly. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that's the second big area. And the third big area is that, as everyone knows, we've got some changes going on in the economy right now. We all read a lot about the possible impact of tariffs on the supply chain, what that may or may not do to some of our customers and some of our communities. And of course, we're going through a period of the federal government shutdown, but we don't exactly know how that's going to impact the economy yet. We don't have the metrics yet. And so there's an expectation that you're going to have to manage change, that we probably will have to see some changes in our qualitative factors and so forth. So those are the kind of three big areas. Steve, I know for CECLSolver clients, mapping is got some natural controls right built in. I want to stop and let you have a chance to just talk about that, sort of encourage people that you do have some controls about data integrity in place.
Yeah, well, since the CECLSolver tool is based upon and uses as its data source the call report data, except for one area, which we'll talk about in a second, the warm mapping specifically. As long as your call reports are accurately reflect your GL and your is properly being mapped to the call reports, the CECLSolver tool will be accurate as well, except for the warm calculations. And the reason that is, our warm calculations, as most of you know, are based upon loan level data. So about a little more than half of our users, so maybe around half of you on the call, plus or minus, are utilizing our mapping service, meaning that you send us your loan level data, and then we, with some guidance from you, map those individual loans to the proper call report buckets, so to speak, and then send that file, an Excel file, back to you. So that's one area that you can sort of either, if you're getting that from us, double check our work, or use that as a tool to search through and do some spot checking to see that that all the individual loans that we have mapped to new vehicle or used vehicle or whatever the segment are properly being done so in that Excel file. With we have one tab for each call report bucket. So that's an easy way to spot check that. If you're not using our tool or our service for calculating your warms, we do have an Excel template that users can utilize themselves by doing the same type of mapping that we would do, and then inserting that information into that template, which are again segregated by buckets and tabs, so they can be sorted through and spot checked. Now, I will say that from a call report standpoint, the controls that we have in place is that in addition to gathering call reports as they're filed, as soon as credit unions are filing their call reports, we're getting access to that data from the NCUA. They're doing a much better job with that on the tech side than in the past, and we're obviously taking advantage of that. Their modernization from an IT standpoint at the NCUA. In addition to gathering call reports as they're filed, we also have a process by which we go back and catch refilings. So if an institution has had to make changes to any previous 5300 and then refile it, we'll catch changes to those historically as well, and they will be integrated automatically. There's nothing that you have to do to approve those or anything. If that's the most updated version of it on the NCUA system, then that's the version that you will have throughout Quick Analytics.
That's great, Steve. So, just want to remind everybody, as wonderful as everyone at CECLSolver and Quick Rate are, there is an expectation that you have a process or a memo or a procedure that you check the checker, right? So again, I would just make sure that I had some kind of process where we, at least on an annual basis, just say, hey, what are we as a management team doing to make sure that the mapping is reasonably accurate? And so you can say, well, we use the CECLSolver tools here, we do this, we do that, and then we will take those tools and spot check and check them for reasonableness. So again, we're talking about process and procedures and making sure that you've considered what could go wrong and that the management team has demonstrated and documented that, that we're doing something about those three areas. So once again, those three areas are the areas that we're hearing the most discussion about modeling moving in. The next slide just points out the fact that we're obviously seeing an increase in credit risk, but it isn't all certain right now. In each of the questions we've seen a little bit of an uptick in past dues and some charge-offs and some expectation, but the things that are really going to impact the economic factors really haven't hit yet. So we've been talking about the credit cycle turning down. It has turned more adverse, worse in certain segments, but it's certainly not across the board and it's not consistent in all markets. So how will we watch that? So we need to be watching those and be ready for that move. And then the fact that that second point, most of our reserve is in the industry still based on qualitative factors. We just haven't had the level of charge-offs that drives most of the reserve for most of the industry. And so we should be ready that, if and when those charge-offs happen, if the economy turns more adverse, we would kind of expect that we may have to adjust our qualitative factors, and then we may have to make a shift between having more of our reserve based on actual historical losses than qualitative factors. And that's one that while we all kind of can talk about and expect, it's deserving of some discussion with our supervisory committees, our audit committees, our risk committees, our board, just to have some expectation of how will we address that and so forth. In that next slide, Sean, we've just talked about, where do we think in our market and in our institution's risk profile has the credit cycle turned? What should we expect about that? How will it affect my CECL model? And then just having a discussion with the management team. Once again, the risk committees, the senior management, the board, supervisory committee, audit committee, if you use that. How will those affect things? Because what we're expecting is that we'll see not wild volatility, but we are expecting to see some volatility as we move through 2026 in particular. And so just want to set the stage that we have that expectation there. And then we're a huge advocate in using peer analysis to inform your decision. So make your best shot at what you think's happening to your institution, but also be cognizant. I'd spend a little bit more time than normal, to be honest, as I moved in at the end of this year and into the next, looking at peer analysis and watching what other people are doing and how they're assessing the credit risk and what's happening to their qualitative factors. And Sean, I've always loved your tools, all the tools that are embedded not only in CECLSolver but in Quick Analytics to kind of help us understand, hey, this is my best guess, but I don't want to be the only one out in left field by myself.
Absolutely.
What other people are doing too, right?
Yeah, it's an incredible tool, right? Because again, you're not going it alone, and just having some context is, we think, has kind of always been a hallmark of what we felt about. You need to know your absolute situation, but relative comparisons are incredibly helpful. Steve, I can see you're
Yeah,
ready to jump in.
well, there's only strength in numbers if you know the numbers.
Yeah, that's right. And
Well said. Well said.
And then to add a little bit of pain to all of this conversation, we're having to live with all this uncertainty. And then the next slide, I have to put my auditor or accountant hat on and just point out to you, hey, guess what? Not only do we have all that hanging over our head to think about, but we do have some changes in the accounting guidance. The FASB has issued 2 accounting standard updates that impact or are related to CECL. One of them dealing with very short-term current receivables, current contract assets, short-lived assets that quite honestly, we're not expecting that particular pronouncement to have as much impact to financial institutions. It's for some other institutions that have to use CECL for part of their balance sheet. The bigger issue is that for institutions that have acquired loans from others, either buying individual loans or buying through M&A activity a book of loans, there is going to be an accounting standards that will be in effect for years after 2026, but early adoption is permitted, and I am expecting some people to use that early adoption. And so that pronouncement will simplify, if you will, the calculation and give you some opportunities to avoid so-called double counting. That's a pretty complex standard, Sean. I don't think we have time to get into it, but my point in bringing that up is to just point everyone's attention to the fact that for right now and for year end, we have the economic uncertainty and we have where we are in the credit cycle to focus on. As you move into 2026, I'd be watching carefully the accounting guidance. I'd be talking with my financial reporting folks. I'd be talking with my external auditor and get a handle on whether this accounting standards update with respect to acquired loans will affect my balance sheet or not, and then how to do that. So nothing to worry about right now, but something to be thinking about as you plan for the how you apply CECL going into 26. So I hate to put that accountant and auditor hat on, but I just wanted to alert you to the fact that we do have an accounting standards update that will affect CECL. And it's really going to be more an issue of 26 and 27, but I just want to make sure that we knew that was there. So on a more practical basis, Sean, I put together a little bit of checklist of maybe what people should be thinking about as they move forward. And so this is kind of a summary of those elements. I would be starting to talk now with your board and management about how we're going to respond to changes in the economic conditions. And if in fact the credit cycle starts turning in 26, Sean, I don't know about you, but my crystal ball is pretty cloudy. We've been thinking about this for about 2 years,
Yeah.
and maybe it won't turn at all and everything will be wonderful. But there is an expectation, I suppose, that 26 may be bumpier as we move through some of these issues. And so I would start talking about this. How are we as an institution going to expect the impact of government shutdown or supply chain due to tariffs? I would look at my loan portfolio, my customer base, and see if I could identify large loans that their business would be impacted by tariff changes, or market areas where there's a significant amount of federal government employees that may have been impacted by the government shutdown in terms of their economic picture. So it's really just looking at the thoughtfulness of what do we know and how are we going to be ready for that. And then as we move through those economic conditions, we may see a shift in the components of the total allowance. In other words, some layers of the loan portfolio, we may see a need to move those economic factors, qualitative factors, a little bit more. We may see some volatility as we go through there and so forth. And so I would, just be having a conversation about, are we going to be totally taken back and surprised if we see some volatility? Not expecting there to be dramatic volatility, but nonetheless some volatility in the way we calculate and the factors. And then I'd be a student right now of peer analysis and media coverage and regulatory messaging as we move into 26 and through 26, because there's just a lot on the table that's a little bit uncertain. And sometimes our, regulatory agencies want to, you to go ahead and be aggressively thinking about that. So we'll start to hear a little bit more messaging on there. The next slide just has a couple more points on it that I'd be, thinking about, and that would be that I would be more intentional about talking with my customer-facing staff about product changes and underwriting changes that are happening at the institution as we kind of work through the rest of this year and into next year. Our marketing and customer facing folks may want to change the product offerings. Unfortunately, usually the CFO and the controller are the last people to hear about that. So sometimes that's an oops in the call report or the way we group things. So I would be having a conversation about that, just to make sure that it doesn't, change anything or make the CECL calculation more complicated. And then I would probably set some time aside in 26 to really be looking at our process and procedures, and especially be talking about economic factors and the qualitative factors, and watching the industry best practices, because we are seeing we'll have a reporting season at the end of the year for the banking industry, certainly, and we can look at their footnote disclosures and so forth, and then look at other credit unions. So we can look at how those are going on and so forth. But I am expecting that we'll probably have to tighten up a little bit and document a little bit more. And Steve, as you and I have talked about before, when it comes to policies and procedures, I believe you need to document it, but I always believe less is more. Less words, more accurate to what you do. Less boilerplate language, more specific discussion about what we're specifically doing. So, Sean, I don't have a lot of specific changes to work into next year in terms of the accounting pronouncements and so forth, that this or that has to change. But we are stepping back and saying, hey, all the agencies have model oversight guidance that's out there for all the models we use. And so CECL now has shifted from, you kind of have a grace period because you're implementing and this is all new. Now it's normal. So now we're probably going to see, hey, I want to see really good documentation. I want you to be showing that your roles and responsibilities are documented. And specifically, you're kind of ready for a little bit of bumpiness in 26, because I think I don't know that. My crystal ball is cloudy. But there's an awful lot happening in the news every day that is not yet in the metrics, but you would certainly expect them to be in the metrics at some point. So
Absolutely.
Paul,
No, I think
get that compound out and start polishing as quickly as you can, because I think I speak for everyone here that as soon as you have clarity on what that economic impact is going to be, we need to have another one of these immediately.
yeah, well, I think we'll
December
there's not a
31st of
lot we
next
can
year,
say
you'll be
about
able
that, because right now we're waiting for Washington,
yeah.
To move forward so that we know how long that is. But unfortunately, the shutdown in particular will not hit the economic factors until it's over.
It's the lag.
And
just like with everything.
A lot of the tariff issues, we're seeing some impact on some loan customers and businesses, but it's not widespread yet. So we're going to have to wait and see. I think we've called that the two big elephants. We're waiting to see if they sit down and how they sit down, and that in addition to everything else that's going on in our lives. So anyway, I just wanted to tell everyone, hey, good luck.
no, it's all really good insights, Paul. I mean, again, and I think, just trying to, simplify it as much as we can, as I think you said, right? We've done a great job, I think, as an industry managing our process, but now we really are probably, and the polling questions kind of, hinted to that, right? Like we're really kind of coming to the first time where we might see, past dues and things rise to levels of charge-offs that become, material for a lot of us. And kind of managing that process, like you said, setting expectations, managing and messaging that through our institutions, right? This is all going to be important as we kind of work through next year.
And I
Because
think all of us probably on the call have an intuitive sense or knowledge that in general, over a long period of time, as the credit cycle moves up and down, when we've hit bottom, we see the worst charge-offs and generally an expected improvement in the economy. So we kind of expect that as we go downward on the slope, we start to see increases in charge-offs and so forth. And so we start to see more of the reserve based on historical loss and a little bit less of on the economic, although there could be a time where the economy looks still getting worse and we're having a little bit more charge-offs. But eventually, once you hit the bottom, you would expect typically that the economy is improving. So we have the shift from the reserves from mostly qualitative to mostly historical loss. But while we may intuitively understand that as accountants and financial people and so forth, not all of our board members or management in our risk committees may understand that. So that's once again setting that expectation and thinking about that and trying to understand that transition period for your institution is going to save a lot of problems with respect to just having a significant surprise, if you will, going through your calculation. So we're again, I'm not expecting wild volatility during the year, but it is something that warrants some thoughtfulness and probably some discussion. And if it's discussion in with the board and the risk committee minutes, risk committees, I encourage you to make sure they show up in the minutes. So
exactly, because that is all valuable documentation and discussions, no question about it. Steve, anything you want to add here before we move on to the next one?
No, not right now.
Okay. All right. Well, great, Paul. Thank you so much as always for your comments and insights. As we've done through most of these coffee talks at this point, we're talking and we always try to keep you apprised of enhancements and updates that we've made to the tool. We recognize that these are always optional to you, right? They're done to improve user performance, better understanding, better communication, just better insights of available tools and information that we can try to share with you. So, Steve, anything you want to touch on here before we get into any of the specifics?
No, I mean these are the things that we have worked on recently, or will be, or are currently working on. The most recent was the newer, more simplified unfunded commitment methodology that we rolled out in the last couple months, and we are still working on. And we'll be ready soon with custom peer group functionality, as well as some other industry research functionality, which we're quite excited about. And I'll show you a little bit of some of that industry research. We got some new, more granular data trends to talk about in the next few minutes. So let's go ahead and flip forward here. Yeah, so this is just to remind everybody, we've previewed this and demoed it over the last couple coffee talks, but we now have an additional methodology option for unfunded commitment ACL calculations. The default method is still the exact same way as it's been since we rolled out the CECLSolver, but through lots of feedback and discussions with auditors and examiners, and looking at how they conceptualize reserves for unfunded commitments and how they think about it, and kind of their process for understanding it. It certainly has evolved. It's been very much, it's not just been a learning process for us, right? As bankers, it's been very much a learning process for our regulators as well. And so our default methodology is still completely acceptable, and still, if you're comfortable with how it works and the values that you're getting from it, there's no need to do anything differently than you have been doing. But if you're curious to try out the simplified method, see if it jives better with your understanding or knowledge of unfunded commitments, or simply that it's a more defensible, it produces a more defensible and rational result from your opinion, then you can certainly use a simplified method as well. So if you want to cycle to the next slide, that's the simplified method. It just kind of takes out a couple of the conceptual steps and is very straightforward from that perspective. And so you'll have two options, and you can sort of toggle between them and choose which one best suits your situation, and then use it going forward.
Is there anything a credit union should document going from the default method to the simplified method, Steve, if they decide to do that?
That's a great question. I'm going to have Paul answer it first.
Yeah, so while the reserves for the unfunded commitments is generally not nearly as material as the rest of your reserves, it is still a reserve that I would, document, at least in terms of reporting to the risk committee or whatever your governance is, the full board. I would document which one we're doing. I think you might get a raised eyebrow from an auditor or regulator if you change between the two methods every quarter based on which one is lower. I think if they saw that in practice, that you just flipped back and forth based on the one that was lower, I think it's understandable that someone would ask, well, do you really believe in these, or are you just hitting a lower one? So I would probably, the first time I moved it, I would have maybe a paragraph in the minutes where you reported that the tool allows two different ones, and we believe that this one is more appropriate to the risk profile of our institution. The only thing that could possibly cause a little bit of problems, I think, and this is just my opinion, is if there seemed to be an arbitrary flipping back and forth without a lot of thought or reasoning that one is perhaps preferable to the other. So that would be my comments there. Do you have to change your policy? I don't know that I would have that in my policy. I think I might have it in my procedures, but not hard baked in policy that I would use one or the other. I would probably say we use CECLSolver tool to calculate our reserve level, including unfunded. That's probably all I would say in policy. And then as we go through the procedures, I would explain why you're thinking about doing that. But again, I have to caveat all of this to say that this is one of the lowest level reserves we have. It's certainly probably could be argued that that's pretty immaterial. However, if you went back and forth all the time and there's not a reasonable explanation for that, I could see some questioning of that.
Great.
Next slide.
Yeah, perfect, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the next slide I think I have, this is just to remind everybody, as Paul was pointing out, that it is a relatively small piece of the reserve puzzle, right? More and more credit unions are reporting a reserve for unfunded commitments, but the majority of the industry, by a significant margin still, that is reporting no reserve on the unfunded commitments, even if they have a non-zero, an actual balance for unfunded commitments themselves. So we see, if you look at median reserves on funded commitments for those that are filling out and calculating some level of reserves, we're still only looking at around 5 basis points of those reserves at the median, and 12 basis points at the 75th percentile. And you see those numbers have not changed very much over the past couple of years. So pretty stable, pretty relatively immaterial in a lot of situations. But those of you that are at this point using a methodology calculating a value and considering a slight change. It's not a hugely different methodology. A slight change in methodology, I'd say, are pretty far above ahead of the curve to begin with, and should pat yourselves on the back for considering it. But if you're one of those who are not reporting a reserve on the unfunded commitments and still conceptually believe that that's something that once it's funded, I'll manage as a part of my actual funded loan portfolio reserve, you are not alone in that thought conceptually or in practice either. Ah, yes, coming soon. Peer group. Sorry. Guess it's my turn again.
Yeah.
So one thing that we've been asked for a while now, we wanted to start the CECLSolver tool to be as recognizable and frictionless as is possible with our examiners as we were transitioning to this new reserve methodology across the board for our industry. And so we really focused on the peer groups that our examiners were already very familiar with because they're the ones that came up with them. So if we're going to be using, peer data and peer trends as a very helpful indicator of what everyone is doing in the environment around me and helping with qualitative factor adjustments and everything else, obviously any level of familiarity with some of that methodology that your examiners have is going to go a long way in making them comfortable with it. All that being said, the NCUA has a grand total of 6 peer groups, and they are very, what's the best word? Chunky, I would say. There's if you're not under $10 million in assets or over $1 billion in assets, you've got like 3 options of peer groups. And so while we've always allowed some geographic specificity in those peer groups, otherwise we have limited financially it to those NCUA asset-based large chunk peer groups. That's what we're looking to sharpen the point on going forward, so that you'll be able to hand select individual peers using a multitude, any filter, any financial filter that you can pretty much dream up that's on your call reports. So if you're looking for other similar sized or similar performing a type of credit union in a geography that's maybe not a region or a state, but some mishmash thereof, you're going to have a lot of options for creating some really good custom, local, intelligent, well-built peer groups going forward. And those will be usable not only in the current CECLSolver tool, but in any of the additional tools that we'll be rolling out, analytical tools that we'll be rolling out to credit unions over the course of next year.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I think as Steve said, right, and Paul touched on in his comments, right? We think pure data can be incredibly helpful to you, so that you can kind of just, again, always just have something else to compare your numbers to. Just gives you better context, and from that, we always think, it's just a better way of analyzing this. So the next piece is Steve continues to put together just industry information to share with you. Here's this quarter's update. Steve, you want to take it away?
Some of this you've already seen in past quarters, and we've just updated it now, obviously, to include the third quarter, but some of it is brand spanking new. So we'll see a couple, some new analysis as well. So this is one of the ones we've used for a while, just kind of giving you a feel for where different size credit unions are in their reserve journey, if you will. And at September 30th, not a big change, very, very slight uptick in reserves. I would say sort of across the board, but certainly the larger credit unions over $500 million in assets have larger reserves than their smaller brethren. Of course, the 2 to 10 million credit unions are a little bit of a different animal when it comes to delinquency reporting and charge-offs and how they manage that, and reserves as well. So you see the smallest credit unions on average have a larger reserve as well as a percentage of their portfolio. But looking at everyone kind of in the middle, between 70 to 80 basis points is where, and then closer to 1% for the larger credit unions is where we are at right now. Not a huge amount of variability by region, but the South continues to have a slightly larger reserve, and we typically the East and West slightly less. This also comes from our Excel add-in tool where you can, if you're interested in having a demo of what kind of analysis you can pull using directly in the Excel environment on credit unions around the country, give us a buzz and we can walk you through that. But this is another thing that I update each quarter that comes directly from that. You can see this is a screenshot directly from Excel. If you look over there on the left-hand side, you'll see there's about 1,100 rows because I'm using NCUA Peer Group 5, which is $100 to $500 million in assets, and there are 1,100 of you plus or minus currently. And what we see here is delinquency trends. So when I say delinquent loans, obviously there's different buckets of delinquent loans by how delinquent they are, but reported delinquencies, which is the NCUA defines as all of them that are more than 60 days delinquent are considered reportable delinquencies. And that's the value that I'm honing in on here. So we've added up the different buckets of delinquencies that are more than 60 days, and that's what you see here. And the reason I've circled those three particular columns is because, as you see from a little spark line kind of trend lines on the right there, there's a lot of seasonality going on in delinquencies and charge-offs for credit unions. And so if you're going to compare, you're going to want to look at a similar period a year earlier, because we always see spikes in the fourth quarter and we always see drops in the first quarter. And you can see right there, the zigzag on the trend line, the spikes are fourth quarter and the drops are first quarter, and it happens every year. So if we look at third quarter, we were at 50 basis points median 2 years ago, went up 14 to go to 64 last year, and only an additional 3 basis points to 67 for the third quarter this year. So while we are continuing to see increases in delinquent loans and some deterioration in credit quality somewhat across the board, I would say that by historical standards, it has still been very manageable, and the amount of the speed at which it has been deteriorating I'm seeing a significant leveling off of it. At least in the data that I'm looking at through the publicly reported stuff on the call report. So of course there is a lag there. We're already in the middle of November. However, that's what I've been seeing. Next slide is brand new. So this kind of decided I needed to sharpen the point. I needed to go a little bit more granular and look at the total reported delinquencies at the median and 75th percentile for particular segments of the portfolio on the call report. So if we want to look at just 1 to 4 family first liens, so our mortgage loans, we can see that I've again circled the third quarter of 2023, 2024, and 2025 to compare them to each other. You see again increases in the beginning of at the end of each year, and decreases towards the middle of each year. And we've seen an increase from 21 to 28 to 35 basis points in mortgage loans over the last 2 years. New vehicle loans had a significant, on a percentage basis, increase from 23 to 24, went from, the year 23 to the year 24, from 12 basis points to 18 basis points on the median. But over the previous year, it went from 18 basis points a year ago to 18 basis points this past quarter. So again, a leveling off at the median. And we also like to look not just at medians, but also at higher percentiles. Why is that? Because especially once we get to individual segments of the portfolio, we get lots of zeros. Lots of individual institutions, while they might have some charge-offs somewhere in their portfolio, it's not going to be evenly dispersed, obviously, between their different segments of their portfolio. So when you're looking just at vehicle loans or just mortgages or just credit cards, a much higher percent of each individual institution is going to have 0 losses at any given point in time. That means when you're looking at median values, not averages or weighted averages, but median ones, you're going to get a lot of zeros or a lot of very low levels. So in order to spot trends ahead of time, you really want to start looking at the margins. And I've defined the margins as, well, let's look at the 75th percentile rates, because you start to see improvements and deteriorations at those percentiles before you see them at the median for those reasons. But credit card loans, significant increase from 2023 to 2024, and actually a 1 basis point median decline in reportable delinquencies over the previous from Q3 to Q3. So I thought those were pretty interesting to look at it at a slightly more granular level, while still having a very large sample size. Right, this is 1,000 credit unions or plus that are in this sample size. Next slide.
Yeah, and I think that's just a good example too, just of directionally, again, if you're thinking about Q factors, right? Directionally, we're just headed in a direction that's a little bit more adverse than we've certainly been experiencing.
Yep. All right, so this is a screenshot from our industry research functionality, which you do not yet have, but you will in the future, I promise. It's a great way of pulling some of this data very quickly on different peer groups and visualizing these trends. So what I wanted to do was take a look at different size institutions and track from a slightly longer time period, about 4.5 years or so here. So delinquent loans to total loans, we see that same seasonality here, right? In the fourth quarters, you see those spikes and then the drops in the first quarters. But again, the pace of increase at the margins has declined to an extent, and we're seeing a bit of a leveling off. What else I found relatively interesting here was, despite a decent spread of reserve levels for different size credit unions, and actually a decent size spread level in charge-offs for different size credit unions, which we'll see in a minute, there's not nearly as much of a delta between the delinquent loan levels at different size credit unions. They're pretty tightly packed in here between 60, 64 and 68 basis, only a 4 basis point difference between delinquent loans at all different size credit unions across the country. If you head to the next slide. Net charge-offs, what are we seeing here? Well, less seasonality, which is interesting. Certainly, obviously, a trend increasing starting in 2021 after it bottomed out in early to mid 2021. But we've seen that kind of level off in the last couple quarters here. And what else I find very noteworthy here is a much wider spread of loss experience between smaller and larger credit unions than we saw from the delinquency from a delinquency standpoint. 16 basis points median net charge-offs for $10 to $50 million credit unions, 46 basis point, or almost 3 times that for the larger credit unions over $500 million in assets. And this is, again, just at the median level. Next slide. Wanted to give us some historical context here. And when I'm giving historical context, I also like using something in addition to just the median. So yeah, we saw some increases and we saw some very recent flattening of those increases. But if I zoom out to the last decade, you see these kind of normalized levels of net charge-offs after the last credit cycle, before COVID or anything else happened, where we see kind of median and 75th percentile net charge-offs for, these are for the $100 to $500 million kind of big, thick 1,100 credit unions kind of in the middle there. And you see a larger trend. So while we certainly had increases in charge-offs over the last 3 or 4 years, they're still relatively, they're not, certainly not, I would say, elevated compared to long-term historical standards. Yeah, so I just want to give you another way of visualizing that over a different trend, over a different time period, and kind of give you a range of median to somewhat elevated percentiles.
Yeah, these are great, Steve.
And do I have one? That was it.
That's it.
Yeah, so and more of that kind of analysis to come, but you guys have seen all this. You know how many people are using the CECLSolver, how many scenarios everyone's running and everything else. But the why I keep pointing it out here is because the more institutions that are using it, the thicker that proprietary data set gets, the more accurate and more timely data will be able to give you before the rest of the market has it, as to what everyone else is doing with their WARMs and their Q factors and their reserve levels at each segment of their in each bucket of their call report. So I don't know if you noticed, but we've been getting more timely with releasing this each quarter, and the goal was to have this data available for the third quarter on September 30th, literally on the last day of the quarter, so that, even before any other peer call reports are out, when you're in that first or second week of a next quarter and you're starting to try to come up with a preliminary estimate of where your reserve is, you just don't have any publicly available peer data to go off of yet because it doesn't exist yet. You'll now have access to this proprietary information of what was everyone doing on our tool throughout the course of the third quarter at in these different areas, and that'll help you get a head start on qualitative factor adjustments, tweaking those existing Q factor adjustments and defending and justifying them as you go. And that's it. That's all I got.
Fantastic.
I
So
will point
again,
out that
if there's,
from
go
a
ahead, Paul.
from a peer analysis, that particular slide right there is extremely useful in order to show your risk committee, your board, and so forth. This is where we are, certainly at over 500 institutions in this database. That is certainly, a very significant set of data to look at. And so I would encourage users to not only, all of us can enjoy this kind of slide, but I would probably take that slide and periodically use it as a little bit of an education tool, use a little bit of an update for my board members or supervisory committee or risk committee, and just say, hey, I've told you what we do all the time. Let me show you, some of what's going on in terms of the whole database that's using this tool. So that is an example of how you can use peer analysis to kind of support where you are and what you're using. So Steve, that's a great slide, and I would encourage people to sort of take note of that and be using those tools, not only among the accounting staff, but with the leadership as well.
And one thing I'd like to point out with that, if under those circumstances, when you're looking at this data, you might see some of those adjustments, like the Q factor adjustments at the median level, and say that they seem to be smaller than you would expect. And like I said, that is an artifact of the way medians are calculated and the granularity of loss data at a specific segment. So if you go back one slide, Sean, you'll see that in looking at this data, you can choose the 25th, 50th, or 75th percentile. So, and the chart on the right shows that as well too. So I would encourage, if you're using it in the context that Paul was suggesting, that 25th and 75th percentile range is as helpful, if not, I would say more helpful and meaningful than just focusing on, am I above or below the median? It's more like, am I within a range of what most reasonable institutions like us are doing? So that's why that toggle button up there of the percentile ranks, particularly the 75th percentile one, I think is going to be very helpful. If you see the data to be lots of zeros and not as useful as you thought, look at the 75th percentile.
Yeah, you got it.
And Steve, we had a question come in. Where can we find this data? I mean, if you're
on the CECLSolver tool, there is a tab for CECLSolver user trends on the right hand side tab.
Yeah. So when you're in there, look to the far right.
Yep.
Perfect.
All right. Okay. So any additional final questions? Go ahead and submit those now. Again, a huge thanks to Paul Allen for joining us today. Paul, thank you very much for making these coffee talks when you're on the best we do. So I appreciate that. Remember, Saltmarsh is here as a resource for validation. If you're looking for somebody to validate your tool, they can be of assistance. Any final words, Paul, from you for our crowd today?
No, thank you very much for joining. I'd have to say congratulations on getting through the implementation, and good luck moving forward. Keep your eye on the ball. We probably got some chop ahead. So I encourage you to, pay attention, to be a student, but really appreciate all the tools that CECLSolver provides for the institution. So it's an honor to be with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Steve, any final words before we let everybody go today?
No, I'm waiting on that crystal ball buffing, Paul.
Yeah.
Well, Fantastic. Well, thank you all very much. We'll look forward to seeing you on the next coffee talk. Happy Thanksgiving was in the chat, so we'll say Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. I hope everyone has a great day and weekend, and we'll talk soon. Thank you again. We'll see you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, Nan. Thank you.